Good morning. It's Monday, July 21st. The multi-front war in the Middle East is now 654 days old. I'm your host, Jonathan Schanzer. Welcome back yet again to the FDD Morning Brief. This war in the Middle East has gone from complicated to messy, at least from my vantage point. We've got Mike Huckabee, the U.S. ambassador to Israel, scolding the Israelis for not keeping West Bank settlers in check after they attacked Christians in the West Bank. We've got the Pope hammering Israel too after an attack that inadvertently hit a church in Gaza. Meanwhile, the tensions swayed to Syria remain high as the death toll climbs to more than 1,100. Someone in the White House called Bibi a madman, their words, not mine, for bombing Syria when the Druze came under attack in the first place. Oh, and right now, Bibi has food poisoning, so his trial was put on pause. In Gaza, Hamas is still holding hostages. Iran may still have a bunch of enriched uranium. Hezbollah is trying to get back on its feet, and the Houthis still fire occasional missiles. Let me know if I'm missing anything. But in short, messy. It's time to bring some order to this chaos. To help us get a handle on all this chaos today is former Israeli Knesset member Dr. Einat Wilf. Einat was a foreign policy advisor to the late, great Shimon Peres. She's also the author of 7 books on Israel, including The War of Return, How Western Indulgence of the Palestinian Dream Has Obstructed the Path to Peace. I'm going to pick Einat's brain in just a few minutes, so stick around for a wide-reaching conversation. We're just going to dive into all of it. I've got my eye on the Islamic Republic in Iran right now, and I don't like what I see. First, the Europeans have talks with the regime in Istanbul on Friday. The UK, France, and Germany are not exactly tough on Iran, at least not consistently. I don't want any of them cutting deals without the Israelis and the Trump administration holding the line on enrichment, missiles, proxies, or anything else for that matter. Speaking of proxies, I don't like how the regime is back sending weapons and materiel to the Houthis. We saw a big interdiction last week by the good guys in Yemen, and Israel bombed Houthi targets this morning. But here's my question. How many shipments haven't been stopped? What's getting through to Iran's other proxies? Because whatever does get through takes us one step closer to another round of conflict. You know what else I don't like? I don't like that the regime may be holding some fissile material. Not that they can do much with it right now, but it seems like these psychos want to get their nuclear program going again. And on top of that, the regime says it has restored its missile defenses. I'm not sure those defenses can stand up to Israeli technology, but still not a good sign. Bottom line, the regime is down but not out, and it's eyeing a comeback. Israeli politician Avigdor Lieberman said as much the other day. The winds of war are once again blowing, and far sooner than anyone expected. Now for your headlines. Headline 1, the Israeli army is now operating in Deir al-Balah in central Gaza. Remember Deir al-Balah? It's where Hamas staged those grotesque hostage release parades earlier this year, complete with cameras, certificates, and the sick display of the Bibas family's caskets in front of a blood-fanged mural of Bibi. It's also where some of the remaining hostages are thought to be held today. The IDF has been avoiding the area for months until now. Yesterday, the Israeli Air Force dropped evacuation leaflets urging civilians to move southbound toward Al-Mawasi, an area along the coast where tunnels apparently cannot reach. The message: the army is about to act in areas where it has not acted in the past. That's a quote. And now operations are underway. Something tells me this could be a turning point in the war. Relatedly, headline 2, hostage families slammed IDF's Deir al-Balah ground op, fearing that their loved ones' lives could be imperiled. The Hostages and Missing Families Forum says the IDF's moves put remaining captives in grave danger. They may not be wrong. Back in August 2024, just as Israeli troops closed in on the tunnel where hostages were being held, Hamas killed hostages in cold blood, and the hostage families will not forgive or forget, certainly not with Bibi. Meanwhile, ceasefires talks with Israel and Hamas drag on, with Qatar playing both sides as ever. Yesterday, U.S. envoy Adam Boehler urged Hamas to, quote, take the deal, 10 live hostages and 18 bodies in exchange for Palestinian prisoners. Trump is pushing a 60-day ceasefire, promising hostages will be freed very shortly. That would be a welcome development, but why are we not demanding a total end to this hostage crisis? I feel like I'm living in the upside down every time the United States plays by Hamas rules. I mean, who's the super power here, really? I mean, let's get it going, fellas. And relatedly, headline 3, more allegations of Israeli brutality in Gaza and more denials from Israel. The pattern is a predictable one by now. International media outlets erupted with outrage after reports surfaced that the IDF allegedly killed at least 85 Gazans attempting to access humanitarian aid. Israel says its troops fired warning shots to disperse a threatening crowd and insists the Hamas-run Ministry of Health is inflating the stats. That's usually what they do. And it all may be true, but let's be honest. Scenes of chaos at aid sites are becoming dangerously commonplace. And we know that Hamas is deliberately working to undermine the work of the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, the GHF, which disperses food in an effort to deprive Hamas and the UN of agency. Hamas is responding with utter brutality, killing Gazans to prevent a change in the balance of power and to hold on to control. Look, I don't have eyes on what's happening on the ground, but from the outside, it looks bad, really bad. The Israelis need to gain a handle on Gaza and prevent more chaos. Simply blaming Hamas won't cut it. If Israel wants to avoid deepening international isolation, it simply must put an end to this horrible news cycle. And it's on Israel to do it. Absolutely. All right. It's time for my conversation with former Israeli politician and all-around terrific analyst of Middle Eastern affairs, Dr. Einat Wilf. Let's get to it. Welcome to the FDD Morning Brief, Dr. Einat Wilf.
Thank you.
All right. So we're going to do the hard stuff today, I think. I warned you. I want to get to those tough questions that people don't seem to know how to answer, and I think we probably can. So let's start what's happening in Gaza. I assume you support the mission of the GHF because you're a major critic of UNRWA, and we know that UNRWA was partnering with Hamas, supporting Hamas. They're the back office of Hamas. Okay, so UNRWA's out of the picture, but what does Israel need to do to set things right in Gaza right now? The GHF doesn't seem to have a handle on things. This sort of feels like it's a job for the IDF, and yet the IDF probably doesn't want to wade in too deep. So what's the answer?
This is the outcome of a few fundamental mistakes. The first is the notion that UNRWA is or has ever been a humanitarian organization. As I'm sure you know, I've written repeatedly with my co-writer Adi Schwartz that UNRWA is a Palestinian organization devoted to the ideology that I've come to call Palestinianism, this unique and total obsession with the non-existence of a Jewish state. Everything else is in the service of realizing that ideology. Because people have made the mistake, and UNRWA has been very busy promoting that idea, that UNRWA is merely a humanitarian organization. It's actually an anti-humanitarian organization. The very need for UNRWA is the outcome of the fact that UNRWA perpetuates a war that should have been over in 1949. Because people make that mistake, then they think that they need to replace UNRWA with another supply organization. And that's a fundamental mistake. Let's go back to the basics. The basics is that the people of Gaza are not a charity basket case. Gaza is not some landlocked, windswept place that is not capable of upholding an economy that sustains its people. That is not the case. The only problem Gaza has is that its people are uniquely focused on destroying what Israel has built rather than building for themselves. Therefore, they are perfectly capable, as we've seen on October 7th. October 7th required billions of dollars, years of investment in infrastructure, leadership, strategy, vision of the perverse kind. But this all shows you that the people of Gaza are a capable people whose problem is not capacity, is not resources. Their problem is ideology. So the fact that UNRWA was replaced with another organization that supplies Gaza is the foundational mistake. And once you make mistakes, nothing good will come of it. Now, this rests on another foundational mistake, the one that defines this war as a war against Hamas. Now, Hamas have compared it to the Americans declaring war in December of 1941 on Japanese pilots. Hamas is merely the executive arm of the Palestinianist ideology. Therefore, if you kill 10, 20,000 Hamas operatives, they recruit more because they operate on behalf of their people's ideology. So once you define the enemy badly, then you create this bizarre notion that you somehow have a responsibility to supply the enemy. Now, people think that this is something that international humanitarian law mandates. Now, I went and read it because international humanitarian law was not written by a bunch of pacifists. It was written by people who knew that wars had to be waged and won. And what it says is that basically one side to the war, Israel, has the obligation to allow, not to supply itself, to allow the supply to women and children up to the age of 15, provided it does not get rerouted to the enemy and does not provide the enemy as an advantage, which we know it does. So Israel's actually under no obligation to supply Gaza, not even to allow it, but it's more than welcome to allow Egypt to do it. But fundamentally, we need to go back to the basics. This is not Israel's responsibility. International humanitarian law understands that it is stupid to supply your enemy because it merely extends the suffering and the war, which is why I call it anti-humanitarian assistance, because it only extends the war.
All right. Those are obviously some tough words, and I get it. And I understand to the letter of the law, that's where we are. But let me just say, Israel's getting shellacked right now in the international media. I mean, it's not hard to see. You see it in Israeli publications, not just at the usual suspects, the New York Times, the BBC, CNN, etc. So what's the way out for Israel, right? I mean, it looks like Israel's been sort of shoved into this corner. They're being knocked around by the international community. You have to do this, you have to do that, even if it's not the Israeli obligation. So what's the way out?
Stop being stupid. Stop assuming obligations that are not our own. Make it very clear that this is not our obligation. The letter and the spirit of the law are the same. Again, the spirit of the law is to ensure that wars ultimately can come to an end, and not that you constantly supply your enemy so that it constantly kills you so that the war continues forever. The law is actually smart. So Israel has to say, this is not our obligation. When we learn that it no longer provides an advantage to the enemy, it no longer gets used by the enemy, then we are more than happy to enable the supplies, but we are going to abide by both the letter and the spirit of the law, which was written by people who knew that wars had to be waged and won.
All right. Let's pivot away from Gaza for just a minute. I need to do this because I'm a little confused. Tell me about the Israeli policy in Syria. Is this the right time for Israel to be picking new fights in Syria for the IDF? I mean, it seems to me that the Israelis are pretty spread thin. They can't afford more messes across the region. You got, Ambassador Tom Barrack slamming the Israelis right now. You got people in Israel who are uncomfortable with some of the operations. That said, I mean, you also, I think, hear people saying that what happens with the Druze can end with the Jews. You need to hold the line as it relates to attacks against minorities. And of course, we know that the Druze are important to Israelis. I mean, I guess I'm open to hearing other opinions here, but where are you on all this? And how are we to understand what's happening in Sweden in the big picture?
I think the confusion, both in the policy and in the understanding, comes from a genuine confusion and kind of being of two minds in terms of the vision for the region. Uh, it's clear that ever since the Arab Spring, so-called Spring, we've been living through something that I call the breakup of the Ottoman Empire 100 years delayed. As I'm sure you know, the breakup of empires in Europe involved two world wars until it was finally settled based on the principle of self-determination, various borders, tens of millions of refugees. Um, Here, the breakup of the Ottoman Empire was kind of arrested through the mediation of the French and British, creating essentially states that did not go through a process of self determination. Israel is actually one of the few states it's the only state, actually, if you just look at the Levant, not in Egypt, that went through a process of self determination, that has the coherence of a people. Now, Syria is clearly a collection of peoples, tribes, ethnicities, groups, religions, typical of the Levant. Now, the question is, with the breakup of the Ottoman Empire 100 years delayed, are we better off in a region of self-determination for small peoples, Jews, Christians, Alawites, Druze? Would that lead to longer term stability for the region? Or do we benefit from a region where, for example, Syria, as a key element here, is a clearly Sunni majority governed country? And here, just to remind people, there is no Sunni majority governed country in the Levant that ended up being a good example. The only two examples we have is ISIS and Hamas ruled Gaza, which is kind of the examples of territory that is under Sunni majority rule. The Gulf presents a different direction, and the question, can it be in the Levant? So I think there is an actual genuine confusion, even within Israel, and maybe a kind of two minds, which leads also to confused policy as to whether ultimately we are interested in a Middle East in which 100 years after the breakup of the Ottoman Empire, local peoples finally have small self-determined states, and the Druze become a part of that. Or can a Sunni majority country in the Levant work and not be a long-term danger to the region? And I think there's a big question mark, which is why you're seeing a confused policy.
I'm still not convinced that this is in the Israeli interest to intervene, but I think you've laid out an important context for us there as something to think about. And I do think that conceptually, you're right. We have some interesting choices ahead of us. I still question the wisdom of intervening at this moment, but okay. Talk to us about the Israeli people right now. The 12-day Iran war came and went. It was tough, but the Israelis emerged from that unified and, dare I say, defiant. So what do the Israeli people want right now? An end to the Gaza war looks like one of those things that we see consistently in the polls, but they want to end the war with a full return of the hostages, and that's obviously not happening, at least not right now. So how do you sum up where the Israelis are as it relates to driving toward an outcome that everybody can live with, where this thing comes to an end? Or is that just simply not in the cards?
So it's tough to speak for the Israeli people because, again, I think also what reigns is a sense, this time beyond confusion, a sense of frustration, which basically says choose a lane, pick a lane. Because if the lane is getting out the hostages, and here I have to say, the failure of the management of the war in Gaza, and I would argue that the failure of the war in Gaza began and ended with the anti-humanitarian assistance. It was always going to be about that. Um, if you're, if at the end of the day, nearly 2 years after October 7th, with everything that the Israeli military was able to achieve and the leaders of Hamas all dead, If Hamas still hasn't moved 1 inch from its position on October 8th, which is essentially you only get the last hostage when we are back to an October 6th situation. We govern Gaza either directly or some lie of technocratic government. The territory is fully in our hands. The billions are back to flowing. If that's the option and you haven't been able to make a dent in it, by the way, not a bit thanks to Qatar, uh, then just then just end it already. Give them everything they want. Again, I'll put a question mark here. If we give them everything they want, do we still get all the hostages? But let's assume this happens. Then just do it, or pick a lane, then win already. But again, that goes to the anti-humanitarian assistance. Just this dragging it out and continuing to give a lifeline to the enemy. And I think what you're seeing is that whether you're on the Israeli camp that says we need to win this, the Palestinians have to know that they lost this war. They need to understand that after what they did on October 7th, they will have to transform as a people. Or if you are of the camp that says we already lost on October 7th, the sooner we acknowledge it, the better, let's get our people. Regardless of which camp you are, I think the sense of mounting frustration, and I think it's been for a long time now, is pick a lane. And that's where I think we're at.
Pick a lane. I like it. All right. Last question before I let you go. You are always in the middle of some really fun project. What's your latest?
So mostly writing. I'm working on a book based on my course that I taught in Georgetown that will be called Teaching Zionism. I'm working on another book in Hebrew that will have the lovely title of Peace Not Now, which will talk about the need to finally have a long-term vision and to have patience, not a well-known Jewish quality, but one that we need to learn in this region. And yeah, mostly some writing and speaking. That's the usual.
Always fun. All right. You'll let us know when you're back in the U.S. I want to thank you, Dr. Einat Wilf, for joining us today on the FDD Morning Brief.
Thank you.
All right, here's what FDD has on tap for you today. FDD Iran experts Behnam Ben Talablu and Saeed Ghassan-Minajad have a terrific piece in the Wall Street Journal about Iranian death threats against President Donald Trump. To be very clear, these are very real threats. As Behnam and Saeed note, when the Islamic Republic says it wants the Donald dead, they mean it. Just ask famed writer Salman Rushdie, who narrowly survived an assassination attempt in 2022, decades after the regime issued a fatwa against him. Behnam and Saeed warn that so long as the Iranian regime lives, Trump will need to be wary of the murderous thugs from the Islamic Republic who have made him a marked man. Check out the policy brief that my colleague Ord Kitchery published on FDD's website, unpacking the implosion of that pesky UN Human Rights Commission tasked with investigating Israel. In case you missed it, the commission's 3 members all resigned earlier this month, days after the Trump administration slapped sanctions on anti-Semite, clown, and grifter UN Special Rapporteur Francesca Albanese. Here's the thing, though. The commissioner's resignation don't take effect until the fall, which gives the trio time for at least one last anti-Israel hurrah. Ord says the United States should use its leverage at the UN to force the commissioners to step down immediately and shutter the commission once and for all. Yes, sir, I fully agree. Finally, I encourage you to read a flash brief on FDD's website about the recent massacre of hundreds of civilians in Sudan. Sudan is in the midst of a bloody civil war that's seen tens of thousands killed, millions displaced, and millions more facing acute food insecurity. While the world has been hyper-focused on Gaza, almost no one has said a peep about the atrocities in Sudan. A double standard, if I ever saw one. My colleagues Mariam Wahba and David May provide their thoughts about the largest humanitarian crisis in the world that nobody seems to want to talk about. So check out that flash brief on our website. That is going to do it for today, folks. If you're itching for more smart stuff to read, check out the expert analysis on our website, read our quick takes on X, or watch the videos we post on Instagram and YouTube. And yes, you still can make that tax-deductible donation anytime you want at fdd.org/invest. Tune in Wednesday for another riveting, can't-miss episode of the FDD Morning Brief. Catch my conversation with Democratic Congressman Josh Gottheimer of New Jersey, a repeat offender and a great friend of FDD. Until then, I'm Jonathan Schanzer, signing off for FDD.